Sensational news. Russia is in complete isolation. Armenia and Azerbaijan are getting closer. Transit of goods without restrictions. Russia is in shock. Aliyev supports Ukraine. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are receiving weapons. It looks like the European Union is about to get a new member. The Kremlin is losing control over the region. Erdoğan is against Putin. Trump is betting on Turkey. The course of the war could change forever. The allies are taking action. The East is closing its doors. Technologies are being blocked. Putin's former friends are turning to the West. All this and more coming up. Watch until the end. Ukraine Today with Renata Slanov welcomes you and brings you the latest events. The Caucasus has finally turned its back on Russia. Armenia and Azerbaijan are getting closer. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, speaking at the 5th Tbilisi Silk Road Forum, stated that the positive dialogue with Turkey gives hope that the border could be opened in the near future.
We are not only politically, but also technically ready, even today, to ensure the transit of cargo trucks through Turkey to Azerbaijan and vice versa. On the territory of Armenia, the roads and border infrastructure are ready for this.
Pashinyan also stated that the Silk Road Forum has brought Armenia closer to signing a peace treaty with Azerbaijan. He also reported that in the near future, pipelines and power lines will be laid across Armenia from Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan, as well as between Yerevan, Baku, and Ankara, and that railway and road communications will be established.
This major project is important not only from an economic point of view, but also as a step toward peace and stability. One of its outcomes will be the opening of a peaceful route connecting Azerbaijan with Nakhchivan.
Moreover, it seems that Armenia has set its sights on the European Union, a stab in the back for Putin. It looks like the European Union is expecting a new member, the end of the dictator's imperial dreams. Where does this drive come from? And how will Russia, which can no longer control the post-Soviet countries, respond to this move? Find out in our report.
The Armenian government will continue to pursue a pro-European course, despite certain political forces insisting on closer ties with Russia. This was stated by Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan in an interview with Deutsche Welle.
Quite a lot of time has passed, and although progress may sometimes appear slow, I think that the relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia are indeed moving in the right direction. There are very serious negotiations underway, and by the beginning of this year, fundamental agreement had already been reached on the main points of the peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Mirzoyan also spoke about the negotiations with Azerbaijan and the beginning of the process to determine the general position of the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
And then, in August of this year, at the initiative of President Trump, a meeting was held in Washington between the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia, during which very significant documents and declarations were signed, including the initialing of a peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
For the first time in 35 years, Kazakh grain was delivered from Azerbaijan to Armenia. President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev also spoke about the positive trend towards peace. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan assured that Armenia is already technically ready to provide transit for cargo trucks through its territory, from Turkey to Azerbaijan and back in both directions.
Just yesterday, the leader of Azerbaijan, the head of state of Azerbaijan, announced that Azerbaijan is opening up transit opportunities for Armenia through its territory. And then we became acquainted with the statement from the Armenian side. The leader of Armenia stated that Armenia's territory is also open for transit shipments from various countries to Azerbaijan.
The head of the Armenian Foreign Ministry refers to Russia as the main partner in the economy and trade. But at the same time, the politician points out that there have been many issues on which Armenia and Russia have reached agreements. But on many other issues, the countries have still not reached a consensus.
Democracy is our choice. We are deepening our relations with the European Union, with the United States of America, that is, with our strategic partners. Cooperation with other countries as a nation is our sovereign choice, our own independent decision. So either normal partners respect each other and each other's decisions, or this partnership needs to be renewed.
According to Ararat Mirzoyan, even before submitting an official application and receiving a response from the European Union, Armenia has already begun working with it, significantly deepening bilateral relations. In addition, negotiations are underway regarding several new documents. Work on a new partnership program has been completed. It will be signed within the next 3 months.
In turn, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev announced the lifting of all restrictions on the transit of goods to Armenia. He made this statement at a joint press conference with Kazakh President Tokayev.
Azerbaijan has lifted all restrictions on the transit of goods to Armenia. The first such transit cargo was a shipment of Kazakh grain to Armenia. I believe this is also a good indication that peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia is now not only on paper, but also in practice.
He emphasized that the development of cooperation between Azerbaijan and Armenia holds significant geopolitical importance.
Today, as new transport routes are opening, as projects related to the Eurasian regions are being implemented, and as the Caucasus and Central Asia become more interconnected and often act as a single geographic space, all of this requires the constant attention and involvement of heads of state.
And yet another stab in Putin's back. Azerbaijan has come to Ukraine's defense. Support for the Ukrainian Armed Forces with weapons and ammunition is becoming a reality. Russia's influence in the Caucasus has finally collapsed. The Kremlin is losing control over the region, and this is only the first blow in a chain of catastrophic defeats.
Azerbaijan may lift the embargo on arms supplies to Ukraine and send its Soviet-era equipment to the front. And media reports have emerged that Azerbaijan is launching serial production of artillery ammunition for Ukraine.
Azerbaijan has accumulated a considerable amount of weaponry, both from the Soviet era and from the arms it purchased while preparing for the deoccupation of its territory. To say that there is an enormous amount of weaponry there, considering the scale of our front and the conduct of the war, of course not. But for Azerbaijan, these numbers are quite substantial and impressive.
After the Russians shot down an Azerbaijani plane over Grozny and refused to admit responsibility for what they had done, Azerbaijan took up the path of war. President Aliyev publicly sided with Ukraine and called Russia an occupier.
And I think this truly resonates with the aspirations of the Ukrainian people to never accept occupation. That is the main piece of advice. That's what we did.
I think that in Azerbaijan itself, people remember very well who brought war to their new land. Formally, yes, it was Armenia, yes, the occupation of Nagorno-Karabakh, but it was the Russian Federation that provided full military, political, and financial support. And moreover, who controlled the occupied Nagorno-Karabakh through so-called peacekeepers? Well, the Russians.
At the SCO forum in Beijing, Aliyev shook Putin's hand very coldly and demonstratively refused to speak with him.
That was an unprecedented act against our people. We are not responsible for the deterioration of relations. We respond constructively and lawfully, but we will never tolerate any signs or manifestations of aggression or disrespect towards us.
In Russia, they didn't lag behind either and began to brutally crack down on members of the Azerbaijani diaspora. The security forces even killed 2 people.
Some of the victims had their ribs broken. There are those who suffered spinal and internal organ injuries. If Azerbaijan hadn't intervened, the number of victims could have been hundreds of times higher.
In Baku, several journalists from a pro-Russian publication were arrested, directly linking some of them to the FSB and Russian intelligence, alleging that they were conducting agent-based intelligence activities on Azerbaijani territory in the interest of the Russian Federation. So, in other words, this was a kind of asymmetric response.
But the real low blow was Azerbaijan and Armenia signing a peace agreement in the United States. They completely ignored Russia as a permanent partner and mediator. Russia's influence in the Caucasus is fading away.
Armenia and Azerbaijan commit to permanently cease hostilities, open up trade, establish transport links, diplomatic relations, and also to respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
The Russian Federation increasingly feels its position weakening, and it senses that it is essentially unable to exert any real influence over Aliyev or Azerbaijan in any way. And we see that it has already started shelling gas infrastructure that is being used by Azerbaijan, already on the territory of Ukraine, specifically in the Odessa region.
Now, Russia has begun shelling Azerbaijani oil depots and gas distribution stations in Ukraine. So far, Azerbaijan is providing Ukraine exclusively with humanitarian aid, but everything could change very quickly.
At the moment, we have provided humanitarian and financial aid totaling 40 million euros, and this assistance is ongoing. It is completely transparent and purely humanitarian in nature. We have implemented several social infrastructure projects in the city of Irpin and will continue to do so. You know that Ukrainian children regularly visit us as guests. We will do everything in our power to help.
According to insider information, there could potentially be several hundred units at that location. Not Smerch or Grad, but Smerch, I think, approximately 80 or so. In fact, such a reinforcement of equipment in a specific section of the front could significantly strengthen our positions. Plus, there are, let's say, literally hundreds of different pieces of military equipment, all of which are of Soviet design, such as, for example, the same types of armored personnel carriers, APCs, and infantry fighting vehicles, IFVs, which, it should be noted, would also be quite useful for Ukraine.
Given the ongoing attempts by the Russians to harm Azerbaijan, Azerbaijani weapons may soon appear on the Ukrainian front lines.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. And here's another surprise for the Kremlin. This time from the United States. Trump is betting on Erdoğan. It is the Turkish leader who could put an end to the war and rein in Putin. Is Erdoğan ready to play big and change the course of history? Sensational details coming up.
Trump recently named the president who could potentially help resolve Russia's war against Ukraine.
Putin respects him, and he's my friend.
Recep Tayyip Erdoğan is actively involved in peacekeeping efforts to end Russia's war against Ukraine. He positions his country as a reliable mediator. The first negotiations after the start of the full-scale war took place in Istanbul in the spring of 2022. Several rounds of talks between representatives of the Kremlin and Ukraine also took place in Turkey in the summer of 2025.
Turkey has always advocated for a diplomatic path to achieve this goal. Now, after 3 years of immense suffering, there is finally
a unique and valuable opportunity for growth and learning.
We hope that the negotiations in Istanbul will open a new chapter.
Turkish mediation was also crucial for the Black Sea Grain Initiative in the Grain Corridor, which was vital for global food security. The Turkish company Baykar continues to integrate Ukrainian-made engines into its combat drones. Ukrainian engineers are undergoing internships at Baykar's plant in Istanbul, and in the future they will form a team to work at the facility in Ukraine, which, during its construction, is constantly under attack from Russia.
Iron, concrete and buildings can be restored. What truly matters is our will and our faith in this project. No missile can damage our friendship.
Turkey's support for Ukraine is not limited to Bayraktars and mediation.
We have demonstrated our solidarity with Ukraine in practice by providing concrete assistance in political, economic, humanitarian and technical spheres.
Turkey closed the straits in the Black Sea to Russian warships, which significantly limited the aggressor's capabilities in the southern direction, and provided Ukraine with missiles with a range of 20 to 70 kilometers for destroying moving and stationary ground targets.
For 500 days, the Ukrainian people have been defending the territorial integrity of their country.
The 25th year has changed a lot in Ankara's relationship with Moscow. The Kremlin feels the distancing of its old partner, realizing that Putin has fewer and fewer allies. And now, another blow from Erdoğan. By the end of 2028, Turkey plans to meet more than half of its natural gas needs through domestic production and imports from the United States. The Kremlin understands that for them, this means a loss of money and a reduction in Russian supplies to the European market.
We won't run out of gas. We have more gas than anywhere else in the world.
We have it, but do we need it? But it's not just about gas. Turkey has implemented a decision to build 3 different military ships, which will take the country's navy another step forward. Turkey plans to develop one of the aircraft carriers together with Spain. Its size is comparable to that of American nuclear aircraft carriers. In the summer of 2025, Turkey joined the drone coalition led by Latvia and the United Kingdom. Currently, the coalition already includes 20 countries, providing Ukraine with military assistance in this area. In 2025, the coalition members pledged to allocate €2.075 billion in support of Ukraine and have already contributed $180 million to the Joint Procurement Fund.
Just as we declared our rejection of the war 3 years ago when the conflict began, today we are determined to do everything possible to end the war through negotiations. In doing so, we continue our steadfast support for Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence.
Turkey has declared its readiness to participate in the reconstruction of Ukraine. Projects are planned in super energy, energy efficiency, social housing, and water supply.
Turkey is interested in ensuring that Ukraine controls the northern coast of the Black Sea and that Russia does not appear there. In addition, Turkey is interested in the reconstruction of Ukraine. It's a huge market. Plus, Turkey sees an opportunity to intensify the development of its military technical industry, considering that it can receive additional resources from selling its weapons. All of this together creates a solid foundation for being interested in this process.
Turkey, as a NATO country, was ready to send its troops to Ukraine to guarantee the implementation of peace agreements. Naturally, this initiative was condemned by the Kremlin. Officially, Ankara supports the territorial integrity of Ukraine, but tries to maintain a balance between the parties. Turkey is still trying to avoid joining the Western sanctions, which, in its view, allows it to remain an effective channel of communication between the Kremlin and Ukraine.
It seems that Putin's allies are fleeing one after another. The East is cutting off trade and blocking technology. Putin is in isolation. The Caucasus and Asia are closing their doors. Russia's former friends are choosing the West. Why do these regions no longer trust the Kremlin? What is behind such a lightning-fast turnaround? Find out all the details right now.
The visit of last hope. That's how the world media dubbed Putin's trip to Tajikistan. After all, former allies, or more accurately, former vassals, are simply turning their backs on Russia.
Russia, for the most part, doesn't even have the tools to seriously pressure its Central Asian partners, who are supposedly its allies, whether it's in the CSTO, the Customs Union, the SCO, or anywhere else. But there doesn't seem to be much willingness to cooperate there.
In fact, analysts from Bloomberg report that the Kremlin's longtime allies in Central Asia and the Caucasus are building ties with China, the European Union, Turkey, and the Gulf countries, seeking to protect themselves from further aggression by Moscow. The reason for all this is the attack on Ukraine, since Putin has essentially declared that he is ready to use force to reclaim any territory that was once under Soviet influence. But such conclusions by Western media are far from unfounded. Among the former allies, Azerbaijan is currently leading by example in its behavior toward Moscow, refusing to attend Putin's parade, seeking other security guarantors, and most importantly, searching for new international trade markets. All of this reflects Baku's current stance, and even Putin's recent admission didn't help. Namely, that it was indeed his air defense that shot down the Azerbaijani plane over Chechnya at the end of last year. It seems that even such statements can no longer save the relationship.
For the most part, for the first time in the history of the post-Soviet space, we are notably seeing a country that is quite close to Moscow, a country that is fairly loyal, and a country with a similar political regime, one that hasn't taken a different path like Ukraine or Georgia under Saakashvili, acting in a way that is not how things were traditionally done. They publicly criticize Russia, and not only criticize, but back up their criticism with reciprocal actions, similar to how Russia acts toward the citizens of this and other countries.
The desire to live independently is being expressed more and more openly by countries in Central Asia. For example, just a few days ago, speaking at the UN, the leader of Kyrgyzstan stated that the country will now build its international relations without looking back at Moscow.
I definitely can
confidently say that today marks the beginning of the formation of a new Central Asia. Thanks to its unity, stability, and growing regional identity, it is taking an increasingly strong position in the system of international relations as an independent actor.
The United States is also adding fuel to the fire in Russian-Asian relations. For instance, Donald Trump announced his readiness to pull yet another territory, Uzbekistan, out of Russia's sphere of influence. The head of the White House announced agreements reached between major U.S. business representatives and the authorities of Uzbekistan. The companies will invest $1 billion in geological exploration and the development of critical mineral deposits in Uzbekistan. Trump also announced a major deal between Uzbekistan Airways and the American corporation Boeing. The agreement, which involves the delivery of 22 aircraft, is valued at $8 billion.
There are many areas in which Uzbekistan and the United States of America can expand mutually beneficial cooperation. I assure you, I personally guarantee the success of American companies operating in Uzbekistan. We will create all the necessary conditions so that American businesses feel confident and can fully take advantage of the opportunities in our market.
A sensational piece of news was also published the day before by Reuters journalists. Turkey will be able to meet its gas needs and therefore is reducing imports from Russia and Iran. As a result, Russia is losing its largest client, one of the last in Europe. At the same time, Ankara plans to ensure its own supply by increasing production and boosting imports from the United States.
I think they can stretch out this process, they can gradually reduce imports, they can substitute them. Of course, Turkey will, as always, in the style of its Eastern diplomacy, cut off this tail piece by piece, or eat the elephant one bite at a time.
China is also eating the elephant piece by piece. For example, China has stopped supplying high-precision equipment to Russia, something Russian manufacturers are now openly stating. In particular, this was mentioned by the owner of Tatpromstan, Ildar Nureyev. The head of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, Oleksiy Kovalenko, said that active negotiations are currently underway between Beijing and Washington on strategic rapprochement, which could ultimately have catastrophic consequences for Russia.
China is currently in no particular hurry to supply those very same dual-use products to Russia, products which Russia would very much like to have, and in fact, desperately needs. These include semiconductors, which are the essential materials at the heart of modern electronics, components that serve as the building blocks for a wide variety of devices, and machinery parts that are necessary for the operation and maintenance of complex equipment. Machinery, especially the large machines used in aircraft manufacturing, as well as specialized machines used for ammunition production, are also affected. Components required for making gunpowder and explosives, which are critical for both military and industrial uses, are in short supply. Other goods impacted by these shortages include items such as plates designed for body armor, providing vital protection for military personnel. In other words, shortages are being experienced across the board, affecting nearly every category of goods and materials.
China, too, based on its own interests, is putting obstacles in Putin's way when it comes to Russia's attempts to form gas alliances with Central Asia. Since the beginning of this year, Gazprom's attempts to build domestic gas networks in these countries have been failing in a rather surprising way, and analysts say this is not without Beijing's involvement.
China has shown its clear lack of interest, made it very clear, and suddenly all these projects started to stall sharply, and they are facing certain contradictions, both economic and some technical, logistical reasons. Sometimes the roads aren't built the right way, sometimes the standards aren't the right ones, sometimes something else goes wrong, or the political will is slightly adjusted in the Central Asian countries, which have started saying that they themselves wouldn't mind supplying oil and gas to China without the mediation and assistance of Russia, and they do not require Russian gas volumes in order to fill their own share of the Chinese gas market. In other words, they are able to supply gas to China independently without having to rely on Russian intermediaries or Russian gas supplies at all.
At the same time, to an uninitiated layperson, it might seem that there is no break in relations happening at all. The leaders of Central Asian countries periodically meet with Putin, and if you listen to Russian propaganda, it sounds like cooperation is only growing stronger. According to analysts, the main reason for such behavior remains the issue of migrants.
A very serious factor that forces Central Asia to take Russia into account and be more conciliatory, even in the current situation. This is the fact that millions of labor migrants work in Russia. This seriously helps to ease social tensions in the region. Because when a generation numbering in the millions returns, for example, Uzbekistan has 2 million, Kyrgyzstan 1 million, and so on, if they return to their home countries and those countries cannot provide them with decent jobs and wages, it means that social discontent could arise in the country.
However, as soon as new ties with the West strengthen and gain momentum, migrants themselves will begin to return home. After all, the nature of deals with Western partners is not about kickbacks and commissions, but about legitimate enrichment at the state level, not for individual officials. And the choice of where to live under sanctioned Russia or in their own country with prospects will no longer be an issue.
On what do you think about the latest events? We look forward to your comments. There's more to come.